The hotel receipt fell from Mark's jacket pocket like a confession written in black ink. 4 nights at the Grand Phoenix Resort, dated last Tuesday through Friday. The same Tuesday through Friday he'd supposedly been sleeping in budget motels. During his grueling real estate development meetings in Denver, my hands trembled as I stared at the elegant letterhead, the spa charges, the romantic dinner for 2 at their rooftop restaurant, 2 champagne flutes, 2 lobster dinners, 2 room keys issued. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He'd told me he was eating gas station sandwiches and surviving on vending machine coffee while negotiating the biggest deal of his career. Instead, he'd been living it up in luxury with someone who wasn't his wife of 8 years. The discovery hit me like ice water in my veins as I stood in our walk-in closet, simply trying to gather his dry cleaning before his next supposed business trip. Mark was downstairs making his morning protein shake, whistling that same tune he always hummed when he was particularly pleased with himself. The sound that once made me smile now felt like nails on a chalkboard. I'd always been the supportive wife. 8 years of marriage to Mark Thompson had taught me to be understanding about his demanding career in real estate development. At least, that's what I thought his career was. As the co-owner of a successful tech consulting firm that my father and I had built from the ground up, I understood the pressures of business travel, late-night calls, and weekend meetings. I'd supported Mark through what he claimed were the challenging early years of establishing his development company, never questioning why his deals always seemed to fall through at the last minute, why his business trips became more frequent, or why he'd grown increasingly secretive about his work. The woman I'd been that morning, Rachel Thompson, successful businesswoman and devoted wife, was methodically folding Mark's shirts when that receipt fluttered to the hardwood floor. The woman who picked it up was someone entirely different. The innocent trust that had defined our marriage evaporated in the span of reading 4 lines of hotel charges. My mind raced backward through the past 6 months. The increased business trips that always seemed to fall on weekends. The new cologne that appeared in our bathroom. Something expensive and sophisticated that he claimed was a gift from a grateful client. The way he'd started going to the gym more frequently, suddenly caring about his appearance in ways he hadn't since our honeymoon. The mysterious calls he'd take in his car, claiming they were sensitive business negotiations that required privacy. I sank onto the leather bench in our closet, surrounded by his carefully organized business attire, and felt the foundation of my world shifting beneath me. The Grand Phoenix Resort wasn't some business hotel. I'd been there myself for a women's entrepreneurs conference 2 years ago. It was a luxury romantic getaway, complete with couples spa packages and private beach access. No real estate developer conducting serious business meetings would choose such a venue, and certainly not for 4 consecutive nights. The mathematical precision of my business mind kicked in, analyzing the evidence like a forensic accountant. 4 nights at $300 per night, spa services totaling $600, 2 dinners at the resort's most expensive restaurant. The timeline perfectly matched his supposed Denver business trip, except Denver was 800 miles away from Phoenix. Even Mark, with all his creative storytelling abilities, couldn't explain being in 2 different states simultaneously. I photographed the receipt with my phone, my hands steady despite the emotional earthquake occurring inside me. Evidence. That's what this was. The first piece of evidence in what I suspected would become a much larger puzzle. My father had taught me early in business that assumptions were dangerous, but facts were powerful. Right now, I had one damning fact and a growing list of suspicions that needed investigation. The sound of Mark's footsteps on the stairs snapped me back to the present moment. I quickly tucked the receipt into my purse and resumed folding his shirts, arranging my face into the same supportive expression I'd worn for years. He appeared in the doorway of our closet, looking handsome in his tailored navy suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile bright and confident. "You're amazing, Rach," he said, kissing my cheek with the same casual affection he'd shown me every morning for 8 years. I don't know what I'd do without you taking care of everything while I'm building our future. Our future. The words felt hollow now, like coins dropped into an empty well. I managed what I hoped was a convincing smile. Just trying to keep. You organized for your big presentation in Denver. It's going to be intense, he said, adjusting his tie in the full-length mirror. 3 days of back-to-back meetings with investors who could make or break this entire project. I probably won't be able to call much. You know how these high-stakes negotiations go. I nodded, playing the understanding wife one more time while my mind cataloged every lie. There was no presentation in Denver. There were no investors. There was only another woman and another deception and what was apparently a long line of deceptions I'd been too trusting to recognize. I'll miss you, I said, the words automatic after years of these goodbyes. Miss you too, babe. But think about what this deal could mean for us. The down payment on that lake house you've always wanted. Maybe we could finally start thinking seriously about kids. Kids? We'd been talking about starting a family for 2 years, but Mark always had another business deal that required his full attention, another financial goal we needed to reach first. Now I wondered if those conversations had been just another layer of his elaborate fiction, another way to keep me invested in a future that apparently didn't include the fidelity I'd assumed was a given. After he left for the airport, I sat in our kitchen with my morning coffee, staring at the receipt on our granite countertop. The house felt different now, like a stage set for a play I'd unknowingly been performing in for months, maybe years. Every detail that had once felt like home now seemed suspicious. The flowers he'd brought me last week after his difficult meeting in Seattle. The expensive wine we'd shared to celebrate his breakthrough with a major client. The weekend getaway he'd surprised me with last month, claiming we both deserved a break from our demanding schedules. Had any of it been real? Or had I been living in an elaborate performance designed to keep me from seeing what was happening right in front of me? I called my assistant Linda and cleared my morning schedule, claiming a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. The family I thought I had was certainly experiencing an emergency, even if I was the only one who knew it yet. My first stop was my father's office downtown. Robert Chen had built our tech consulting firm from nothing, starting in our garage. When I was in high school and growing it into one of Portland's most respected technology companies. He'd taught me everything about business, about reading people, about the importance of trust in professional relationships. He'd also never particularly liked Mark, though he'd been diplomatic enough to keep his reservations mostly to himself. Rachel, he said, looking up from his computer as I knocked on his office door. I wasn't expecting you today. Everything all right? I closed the door behind me and sat across from his desk, the same desk where he'd taught me to analyze financial statements when I was 15 years old. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. His expression shifted to concern, the same look he'd worn when I'd come to him with scraped knees as a child or boy troubles as a teenager. Of course. What's going on? What do you really think of Mark? Not the polite version you give me. Because he's my husband. Your actual opinion. My father leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. That's a loaded question, sweetheart. Why are you asking? I pulled out the receipt and placed it on his desk. Because I found this in his jacket pocket this morning, and it doesn't match where he told me he was going. He examined the receipt, his business instincts immediately recognizing the discrepancies I'd spotted. Phoenix instead of Denver. Luxury resort instead of business hotel. Multiple spa services. He looked up at me with gentle sympathy. How long have the business trips been happening? About 6 months, maybe longer. They've been getting more frequent lately. I paused, dreading the answer to my next question. Dad, you've run background checks on every major client and partner we work with. Is there any way you could find out what Mark's actually been doing? He was already reaching for his phone. Rachel, I should tell you something. I had my suspicions about his business operations even before this. Some of the financial details he's mentioned over dinner never quite added up. Real estate development deals don't typically have the timeline and profit margins he's described. My heart sank further. If my father, with his decades of business experience, had noticed inconsistencies, how had I missed them? The answer was obvious and painful. I hadn't been looking because I'd trusted completely. I'd believed every story, every explanation, every excuse because I'd wanted to believe them. I'll make some calls, my father continued, discreetly. But Rachel, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this goes deeper than just infidelity. Deeper than just infidelity. The phrase echoed in my mind as I drove home through Portland's afternoon traffic. What else could there be? Financial fraud? Complete fabrication of his entire career? The Mark I'd married had seemed so ambitious, so driven to build something meaningful. Had that all been an elaborate performance? Back home, I found myself seeing our house through new eyes. The expensive renovations Mark had insisted on last year, claiming they were investments in our property value. The new furniture that had appeared gradually, always with explanations about bonuses from successful deals. The luxury vacation to Europe he'd surprised me with for our 7th anniversary, paid for with what he'd called his biggest commission yet. I walked through our home like a detective examining a crime scene, noting details I'd never questioned before. Mark's home office was always locked when he wasn't there, something he'd explained as necessary for protecting sensitive client information. His laptop was password protected with security that seemed excessive for a small real estate development firm. He'd insisted we maintain separate bank accounts for our business expenses, claiming it helped with tax organization. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Every reasonable explanation he'd offered now seemed like another thread in an elaborate web of deception. I sat at our kitchen table and made a list of everything I could remember that had never quite made sense. The list filled 2 pages. Small inconsistencies and odd details that I'd dismissed as quirks of his profession or personality. Viewed together, they formed a pattern of deliberate misdirection. The afternoon stretched endlessly as I waited for my father's call. I tried to work on client proposals for my own business, but concentration was impossible. Every noise from the street made me jump, afraid Mark had returned unexpectedly. The house that had always been my sanctuary now felt like a place where I was hiding secrets from someone who had apparently been hiding much bigger secrets from me. When my phone finally rang, I answered before the first ring finished. Dad? Rachel, we need to talk. Can you come back to the office? And honey, you might want to bring that receipt and anything else unusual you found. The gravity in his voice told me everything I needed to know. This was going to be worse than I'd imagined. I gathered the receipt, Mark's business cards, from companies I'd never heard of, and a folder of bank statements from our joint account that showed regular transfers to accounts I couldn't identify. The evidence of my own ignorance felt heavy in my hands as I drove back downtown, my marriage and my sense of reality dissolving with each mile. My father was waiting with his longtime friend, Detective James Rivera, a man I'd known since childhood, who now worked in the Financial Crimes Division. The serious expressions on both their faces confirmed my worst fears. Rachel, Detective Rivera said gently, sit down. We need to talk about your husband's business activities. I sank into the chair, clutching my folder of evidence, and prepared to learn just how thoroughly I'd been deceived. The woman who'd woken up that morning believing she had a loving marriage and a husband with a demanding but legitimate career was about to discover that almost everything she'd believed about her life was carefully constructed fiction. The Mark Thompson I thought I'd married didn't exist. The real Mark Thompson was someone I was only just beginning to meet, and I had the sinking feeling that the introduction was going to shatter everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the 8 years of my life I'd spent building a future with a stranger. Detective Rivera opened a manila folder thick with documents and photographs. Rachel, your husband isn't in real estate development. He's never been in real estate development. According to our investigation, Mark Thompson has been running what appears to be an elaborate long-term fraud scheme, and you've been unknowingly providing the financial foundation for it. The words hit me like physical blows. I stared at the photographs Rivera spread across my father's conference table. Images of Mark entering upscale hotels with a blonde woman I'd never seen before. Credit card statements showing purchases at jewelry stores, expensive restaurants, and luxury retailers. Bank records revealing multiple accounts in his name that I'd never known existed. Who is she? I managed to ask, pointing to the woman in the photographs. Ashley Parker, 28 years old, works at a marketing agency downtown. According to our preliminary investigation, she believes Mark is a successful investment consultant who travels frequently for work. She has no idea he's married. I studied Ashley's face in the photographs. She was beautiful in an effortless way, with long blonde hair and a bright smile. In every image, she looked happy, genuinely excited to be with Mark. The same expression I'd probably worn during our early dating years, before the constant business trips and secretive phone calls became normal. She's another victim, I said, quietly. That's our assessment, Rivera confirmed. Mark has been maintaining elaborate separate lives with multiple women over the past 3 years. Ashley is just the most recent we've identified. 3 years. I felt sick. Multiple women? My father reached across the table and squeezed my hand. There were at least 2 others before Ashley. Different cities, similar patterns. He would establish relationships, maintain them for several months while traveling back and forth, then gradually fade away when the women started asking too many questions about his work or wanted to meet his family. Rivera pulled out another set of documents. Here's where it gets more concerning for you personally, Rachel. Mark has been using your joint accounts and your business connections to fund these relationships. The expensive gifts, the luxury hotels, the romantic getaways, all of it has been paid for with money from accounts that you've been contributing to. I stared at the bank statements, seeing patterns I'd never noticed before. Regular transfers that Mark had explained as business investments or equipment purchases. Withdrawals that supposedly went to contractors or development costs. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 2 years, nearly $200,000 had been moved from our joint accounts into his private accounts, then spent on his other relationships. But that's not the worst part, my father said gently. Show her the business registration documents, Jim. Rivera pulled out official-looking paperwork. Mark has been using your name and your company's reputation to establish credibility with these women. He's told each of them that he's married to a successful tech entrepreneur who understands his demanding travel schedule. He's essentially been using your success to make himself appear more legitimate and financially stable. The betrayal went deeper than infidelity. Mark hadn't just been cheating on me. He'd been stealing from me, lying about me, and using my accomplishments to deceive other women. Every business trip, every late-night phone call, every explanation about demanding clients had been calculated, deception designed to maintain multiple relationships while draining our shared resources. How long have you known about this? I asked Rivera. We started investigating Mark 6 months ago when one of his previous girlfriends, a woman named Lisa from Seattle, reported suspicious financial activity. She'd loaned him money for what he claimed was a temporary business emergency. When she tried to contact his supposed office to discuss repayment, she discovered the business address was fake. 6 months. The authorities had been investigating my husband for 6 months while I'd been completely oblivious, supporting what I thought was his legitimate career while he systematically betrayed me and defrauded other women. What happens now? I asked. That depends partly on you, Rivera said. We have enough evidence to arrest Mark on multiple fraud charges, but we'd like to gather more information about his current activities. Specifically, we'd like to understand how deep his deception goes with Ashley Parker. My father leaned forward. Rachel, they're asking if you'd be willing to help with the investigation. The idea of actively participating in exposing Mark's crimes felt both terrifying and empowering. For 8 years, I'd been a passive participant in my own marriage, trusting and supporting while Mark orchestrated an elaborate double life. The thought of finally taking control, of uncovering the truth and ensuring justice, was appealing in a way that surprised me. What would that involve? Rivera explained their plan. Ashley Parker doesn't know Mark is married, and she certainly doesn't know about his criminal activities. We believe she's genuinely invested in what she thinks is a legitimate relationship. If you were willing to make contact with her, we could potentially learn more about Mark's current schemes and help another victim before she loses more money or emotional investment. The idea of contacting my husband's girlfriend felt surreal, but I found myself nodding. How would that work? We've been monitoring Mark's movements and communications. He's told Ashley that he's going out of town next week for a major business presentation. Based on his pattern, he's probably planning another expensive romantic getaway with her while telling you he's working. If you were to approach Ashley during that time, when she thinks he's traveling, you could reveal the truth about who he really is. I thought about Ashley's bright smile in the photographs, her obvious happiness with a man who was systematically deceiving her just as he'd deceived me. She deserved to know the truth, and I deserved to understand the full extent of Mark's betrayal. I'll do it, I said. Over the next week, I became someone I'd never imagined being, a detective investigating my own marriage. Rivera provided me with surveillance equipment and detailed instructions on how to gather evidence without alerting Mark to the investigation. I learned to document his phone calls, photograph his personal belongings when he wasn't home, and track his actual movements versus his claimed business activities. The process was simultaneously heartbreaking and enlightening. Every piece of evidence revealed another layer of deception. I found receipts for jewelry I'd never received, restaurant bills for romantic dinners that had supposedly been business meetings, and hotel confirmations for luxury suites during trips when he'd claimed to be staying in budget accommodations. Most devastating was discovering a second phone hidden in his car, containing text messages that revealed the depth of his emotional involvement with Ashley. The messages weren't just about sex or casual companionship. They showed a man who was genuinely invested in maintaining a relationship with her. He sent her good morning texts, remembered important details about her work and family, and expressed what appeared to be real affection. Reading those messages, I realized that Mark wasn't just a man having affairs. He was someone capable of maintaining genuine emotional connections with multiple women simultaneously, compartmentalizing his life so completely that each relationship existed in its own isolated bubble. The Mark who kissed me goodbye each morning and told me he loved me was the same Mark who was texting Ashley about missing her and planning their future together. The psychological complexity of his deception was staggering. He wasn't just lying about his whereabouts. He was maintaining entirely separate personalities, adapting his interests, opinions, and even his goals to match what each woman wanted to hear. With me, he was the ambitious businessman building our future. With Ashley, he was the successful consultant who valued work-life balance and spontaneous adventures. 5 days before his next supposed business trip, I made the call to Ashley Parker. "Hello, is this Ashley?" I asked, my heart pounding as I stood in my office overlooking downtown Portland. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Rachel, and I need to speak with you about Mark Thompson. I think we have some things in common that you should know about." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Mark has never mentioned anyone named Rachel." "I'm sure he hasn't. Could we meet for coffee?" "I promise you'll want to hear what I have to say." Another pause, Then curiosity won over caution. Okay, but I can only meet briefly. I have a client presentation this afternoon. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, neutral territory where both of us could feel safe. I arrived early and chose a corner table where we could speak privately. When Ashley walked in, I recognized her immediately from the surveillance photos, but seeing her in person was different. She was even more beautiful than the pictures suggested, with an energy and confidence that reminded me of myself at her. She approached my table cautiously, clearly unsure what to expect. Rachel? Thank you for coming, I said, gesturing for her to sit across from me. I know this is unusual, and I'm sure you're wondering what this is about. Ashley sat down but remained on edge, her purse clutched in her lap as if she might need to leave quickly. You mentioned Mark. How do you know him? I pulled out my phone and showed her a photograph from our wedding 8 years ago. Mark in his tuxedo, his arm around me in my white dress, both of us smiling at the camera with the naive happiness of people who believed in forever. Ashley's face went completely white. She stared at the photo for a long moment, then looked up at me with growing understanding and horror. You're his wife. Yes, and you're the woman he's been traveling to Phoenix with while telling me he's in Denver on business. The coffee shop buzzed with normal afternoon activity around us, while Ashley's world collapsed in real time. I watched her process the information, seeing the same sequence of emotions I'd experienced when I found that hotel receipt. Shock, disbelief, anger, and a desperate hope that there was some reasonable explanation. There has to be a mistake, she said finally. Mark told me he was single. He's never mentioned being married. We've been together for 8 months. 8 months. The timeline matched perfectly with when his business trips had become more frequent, and his behavior at home had become more distant. I pulled out copies of the evidence Rivera had shown me: bank statements, hotel receipts, photographs of Mark. With Ashley and with other women. Ashley, I'm not here to blame you or to cause you pain. You're as much a victim of his deception as I am. But there are things you need to know about the man you think you're in a relationship with. I spread the documents across our small table, watching Ashley's expression change as she absorbed the evidence. Her hands shook as she picked up bank statements showing the money Mark had been spending on their relationship. Money that had come from accounts I'd been contributing to for years. This can't be real, she whispered. He loves me. He's talked about us moving in together, about taking a trip to Europe next year. He bought me this necklace for my birthday last month. She touched a delicate gold chain at her throat. He bought me a similar necklace for our anniversary, I said gently, pulling out my phone to show her a photo of the jewelry Mark had given me. The necklaces were nearly identical, purchased from the same high-end jeweler with money from our joint account. Ashley's composure finally cracked. Tears started flowing as the reality of Mark's systematic deception became undeniable. How many others are there? At least 2 that we know of, probably more. Ashley, Mark isn't who he claims to be. His business doesn't exist. The success and financial stability he's shown you, it's all built on money stolen from me and possibly from other women he's deceived. I explained about the police investigation, about Rivera's evidence, about the years of financial fraud that had funded Mark's multiple relationships. With each revelation, Ashley seemed to shrink further into herself, the confident woman who'd walked into the coffee shop replaced by someone trying to comprehend how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. What do you want from me? She asked finally. I want to help you, I said. And I want your help in making sure Mark faces consequences for what he's done. Not just to us, but to all the women he's deceived and will continue to deceive if he's not stopped. Ashley wiped her eyes with a napkin, and I saw something shift in her expression. The shock and hurt were still there, but underneath them was a growing anger that I recognized from my own experience. What do you need me to do? Over the next hour, I explained Rivera's plan. Mark had told Ashley he was leaving for a business trip to San Francisco the following Tuesday, the same trip he'd told me was to Denver for investor meetings. In reality, Rivera's surveillance suggested Mark was planning to take Ashley to the wine country north of San Francisco for a romantic, long weekend, all expenses paid with money from our joint account. The plan is for you to act normal, go on the trip with him, but document everything, I explained. The police will be monitoring his activities, and your cooperation could provide the final evidence they need to arrest him for fraud. Ashley stared into her coffee cup, processing the request. You want me to pretend I don't know he's married? Pretend I still believe his lies? And help gather evidence against him? I know it's a lot to ask, but Ashley, if we don't stop him now, he'll just move on to his next victim. There will be another woman who falls for his charm, another woman who trusts him with her heart and her financial security, another woman who believes she's building a future with someone who's systematically deceiving her. The truth of those words resonated with both of us. We sat in silence for several minutes, two women who had loved the same man, both of us gradually understanding that the man we'd loved had never really existed. Finally, Ashley looked up at me with determination in her eyes. What exactly do you need me to do? The drive to Monterey felt like crossing into a different world. I'd left Portland at dawn, my car packed with essentials and a heart full of resolve that surprised me with its intensity. Ashley had agreed to help with the investigation, and Detective Rivera had everything in place for Mark's arrest upon his return from what he thought would be another successful deception. But before I could face the confrontation that awaited me back home, I needed time to transform myself from the woman who had discovered those hotel receipts into someone capable of orchestrating the downfall of a master manipulator. The coastal highway stretched before me like a ribbon of possibility. For the first time in 8 years, I was traveling somewhere Mark didn't know about, making decisions he couldn't influence, spending money he couldn't track. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I'd spent so long defining myself as half of a couple that being entirely autonomous felt like learning to breathe underwater. I'd chosen Monterey deliberately. The town held no memories of Mark, no shared experiences that could cloud my judgment or weaken my resolve. It was far enough from Portland to feel like genuine escape, but close enough to return quickly when the time came to execute our plan. Most importantly, it was where my college roommate Amanda Foster had moved after graduating, building a successful art therapy practice that helped people rebuild their lives after trauma. Amanda had been my closest friend before marriage gradually, consumed my social connections the way Mark's deceptions had consumed my financial resources. I'd let the friendship drift, explaining away missed calls and declined invitations with Mark's demanding schedule and my own business commitments. Now, driving toward her clifftop studio overlooking Monterey Bay, I realized how much I'd lost, beyond money and trust. I'd lost myself. The studio was exactly what I'd expected from Amanda. A converted warehouse with enormous windows, natural light flooding across canvases covered in bold, emotional artwork. She was waiting for me when I arrived, her paint-stained apron and concerned expression telling me she understood this wasn't a casual visit. "Rachel," she said, embracing me with the warmth I'd forgotten friends could offer. "When you called yesterday, you sounded different. What's happening?" I'd practiced this conversation during the 6-hour drive, but standing in her studio surrounded by artwork that spoke to transformation and healing, the words came easier than expected. I told her everything. The hotel receipt, the investigation, Ashley Parker, the years of systematic deception that had funded Mark's elaborate double life. Amanda listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger to determination. "You're staying here," she said when I finished. "Not in some impersonal hotel where you'll sit alone overthinking everything. You're staying in my guest room, and we're going to figure out who you are when you're not trying to be the perfect wife to a sociopath." The word sociopath hit me like cold water. I'd been thinking of Mark as a cheater, a liar, someone weak who couldn't commit to our marriage. But Amanda's clinical assessment was more accurate. The level of compartmentalization required to maintain multiple relationships while systematically defrauding the women who loved him indicated something far more disturbing than ordinary infidelity. "I have been so stupid," I said, tears finally, coming after days of numb shock. "You've been trusting," Amanda corrected firmly. "There's nothing stupid about believing someone you love when they tell you they love you back. The failure is his, not yours." That first evening in Monterey, I sat on Amanda's deck watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson while she prepared dinner in her kitchen. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, vast and indifferent to human drama, offering perspective I hadn't realized I desperately needed. For 8 years, my world had revolved around Mark's schedule, Mark's needs, Mark's version of our future. Without that gravitational pull, I felt simultaneously lost and liberated. Amanda emerged with 2 glasses of wine and settled beside me on the weathered wooden deck. "Tell me about the last time you did something purely for yourself," she said. I searched my memory, going back through months and years of decisions made in consultation with Mark, vacations planned around his availability, career choices influenced by his opinions about what would be best for our marriage. "I honestly can't remember," I admitted. "That's what I thought. Rachel, when we were in college, you were the most decisive person I knew. You started your first business at 19, convinced your professors to let you substitute entrepreneurship, projects for traditional papers, and had 3 job offers before graduation. What happened to that person?" The question haunted me through my first night in Monterey. Lying in Amanda's guest room, listening to the distant sound of waves against rocks, I tried to trace the gradual erosion of my independence. It hadn't happened overnight. Mark had been subtle, praising my supportiveness when I deferred to his preferences, expressing appreciation when I prioritized his needs over my own, gradually training me to find identity in being the ideal partner, rather than pursuing my own ambitions. I'd been so focused on building our marriage that I'd stopped building myself. My tech consulting firm was successful, but I realized I'd been coasting on established clients rather than pursuing new challenges. My friendships had withered under the excuse of being too busy with work and marriage. My hobbies had disappeared one by one, replaced with activities Mark enjoyed or claimed were better investments of our time. The woman who'd discovered those hotel receipts had been a shadow of the person I'd been before marriage. No wonder Mark had felt confident in his deceptions. I'd been so accommodating, so trusting, so eager to maintain harmony that I'd created perfect conditions for a predator to operate without detection. But that realization, painful as it was, also ignited something that had been dormant for years. The fierce independence that had driven me to start my own business at 19 wasn't gone. It had just been buried under layers of compromise and accommodation. Amanda's question had excavated it, and I felt its return like a physical sensation, energy flowing back into muscles that had forgotten their own strength. The next morning, I woke before dawn and walked down to the beach, my bare feet sinking into cool sand as I watched the sun emerge from the horizon. The vastness of the ocean put my problems into perspective while simultaneously making me feel more powerful than I had in years. Mark's deceptions suddenly seemed less like personal failures on my part and more like strategic errors on his. He'd underestimated me, assumed I would remain passive and trusting indefinitely. That assumption was about to prove costly. I spent the day exploring Monterey with Amanda, rediscovering what it felt like to make spontaneous decisions without consulting anyone else. We browsed art galleries where I found myself drawn to paintings of women in transformation, butterflies emerging from cocoons, phoenixes rising from ashes, storms giving way to clear skies. At a small boutique, I purchased clothes that reflected a different version of myself, flowing dresses in bold colors, jewelry that made statements rather than matching everything else, shoes chosen for comfort and style rather than Mark's preferences. "You're starting to look like yourself again," Amanda observed as we had lunch at a seafood restaurant overlooking the harbor. I caught my reflection in the restaurant window and was surprised by what I saw. The past few days had changed more than my wardrobe. My posture was straighter, my expression more alert, my gestures more confident. I looked like someone who made decisions rather than someone who waited for approval. That afternoon, Amanda suggested we visit her art therapy studio. "I think there's something you need to do," she said, leading me to a room filled with easels and art supplies. "I'm not an artist," I protested, but she was already setting up a canvas and arranging paints. "This isn't about artistic skill. It's about expression. About getting emotions out of your head and onto something external where you can examine them." She guided me through basic techniques, showing me how colors could convey feelings, how brushstrokes could express energy or anger or hope. First, I was tentative, worried about making mistakes or creating something ugly. But gradually, I lost myself in the process, painting without thinking, letting my subconscious guide my hands. What emerged was abstract but emotionally clear. Dark, jagged shapes representing the deception and betrayal, gradually giving way to lighter colors and smoother forms. In the upper right corner, I'd painted something that looked like a sunrise, bright and full of promise. "Tell me about this part," Amanda said, pointing to the sunrise. "It's what comes after," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "After the truth comes out, after Mark faces consequences, after I rebuild my life on my own terms." "And what does that life look like?" I studied the painting, seeing possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider during my marriage. Independent, successful on my own merits, connected to people who value honesty, strong enough that no one could deceive me the way Mark has. That evening, I called Detective Rivera to check on the investigation's progress. Ashley had followed through on her commitment, accompanying Mark to the Napa Valley while wearing a wire and documenting his continued lies about his identity and circumstances. The evidence they'd gathered was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, where Mark maintained his fiction about being single, financial records showing fraudulent use of my money to pay for their romantic getaway, and testimony from hotel staff who'd witnessed Mark's elaborate efforts to conceal his true identity. "We'll arrest him as soon as he returns to Portland," Rivera assured me. "The district attorney is confident we have enough for multiple felony charges, fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. He's looking at serious prison time." Prison time. The words should have brought satisfaction, but instead, I felt a strange emptiness. Destroying Mark wouldn't rebuild the 8 years. I'd lost or restore the trust I'd never be able to offer so freely again. Justice was necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. I needed to do more than just survive Mark's betrayal. I needed to transform it into something powerful. Over the next few days in Monterey, I began developing a plan that went far beyond simple revenge. I started researching organizations that helped victims of financial fraud, discovering that Mark's tactics were more common than I'd realized. Thousands of women every year fell victim to elaborate deceptions by men who used charm and fake businesses to exploit their trust and resources. Most of these women never recovered financially or emotionally from the experience. I had advantages. Most victims didn't. Financial resources Mark hadn't been able to access, business connections he couldn't destroy, and investigative support from law enforcement. Instead of simply rebuilding my own life, I could use those advantages to help other women who'd been targeted by similar predators. Amanda watched me research late into the evening, surrounded by laptops and legal documents, my energy focused and intense in ways it hadn't been during my marriage. "You're planning something bigger than just seeing Mark prosecuted," she observed. "I'm planning to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other women," I said. "Mark targeted me because I was successful and trusting. There are thousands of women who fit that profile, and there are hundreds of men like Mark who specialize in exploiting them." I outlined my emerging plan. using my business connections to create a support network for fraud victims, developing educational resources to help women recognize the warning signs of elaborate deceptions, and working with law enforcement to identify and prosecute serial manipulators before they could claim multiple victims. It's ambitious, Amanda said. So was building my tech consulting firm from nothing. So was trusting Mark completely for 8 years. I've proven I can commit fully to something I believe in. The difference is that this time, I'm choosing something worthy of that commitment. The transformation happening inside me was as dramatic as any physical change. The accommodating wife who'd discovered those hotel receipts was being replaced by someone harder, more focused, more dangerous to men, who preyed on women's trust. I wasn't just recovering from Mark's betrayal, I was weaponizing it. My phone rang late that evening. Ashley's voice was shaky but determined. "Rachel, we're flying back tomorrow morning. I have hours of recordings and enough evidence to put Mark away for years. But there's something else you need to know." "What is it?" "He's not just defrauding women he's romantically involved with. Mark has been running investment scams, convincing people to give him money for fake real estate deals. The amounts are massive, Rachel. We're talking about millions of dollars stolen from dozens of victims over the past 5 years. Millions of dollars, dozens of victims. Mark wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a professional criminal who'd been using our marriage as cover for extensive financial crimes. The revelation was staggering, but it also crystallized my resolve. This wasn't about personal revenge anymore. It was about justice for everyone Mark had victimized. "Are you ready to face him when he gets arrested?" Ashley asked. I looked around Amanda's studio, at the painting I'd created showing my emergence from darkness into light, at the plans I'd been developing to help other victims, at the reflection of a woman who'd rediscovered her own strength after years of diminishing herself for someone who'd never deserved the sacrifice. "I'm more than ready," I said. "I'm transformed." The next morning, I packed my car for the drive back to Portland. Amanda hugged me goodbye on her deck, the ocean stretching endlessly behind us. "You're different than when you arrived," she said. "Stronger but also softer somehow. Like you've remembered how to be compassionate without being weak." I understood what she meant. The woman driving back to Portland wasn't the naive wife who'd trusted blindly, but she also wasn't hardened by cynicism. I'd learned to be strategic, without being cruel, protective without being paranoid, independent without being isolated. Mark's betrayal had been devastating, but my response to it was going to be extraordinary. The coastal highway stretched before me, leading back to confrontation and justice, but also to a future I was finally ready to build entirely on my own terms. Mark had stolen 8 years of my life, but he'd also inadvertently given me something valuable. The knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything and smart enough to transform even betrayal into power. I drove toward Portland with purpose, ready to face whatever came next and excited about the woman I was becoming in the process. The call came at 6 a.m. while I was having coffee in my hotel room overlooking downtown Portland. Detective Rivera's voice was crisp and professional, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath his words. "Rachel, we have Mark in custody." The arrest went smoothly at the airport when his flight landed from San Francisco. Ashley's cooperation was invaluable, and the evidence we gathered during his trip with her sealed the case. He's being held without bail pending arraignment on multiple felony charges. I set down my coffee cup, surprised by the steadiness of my hands. After weeks of anticipation, the moment felt both climactic and anticlimactic. Mark Thompson, the man who'd shared my bed for 8 years while systematically defrauding me and countless others, was finally facing consequences for his crimes. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we move to the next phase. Mark's arrest is just the beginning. Our investigation has uncovered a network of victims across multiple states, and we need to coordinate with federal authorities to address the full scope of his crimes. We're also going to need your testimony for the prosecution." I'd been preparing for this conversation throughout my transformation in Monterey. The woman who'd fled Portland in shock and confusion had returned with a clear understanding of her role in ensuring justice. But my plans extended far beyond simply testifying against my husband. I want to do more than just testify, I said. I want to help contact his other victims, and I want to use my resources to ensure they get the support they need to rebuild their lives. Rivera paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. Rachel, we appreciate your willingness to help, but victim advocacy is usually handled by specialized organizations. Your primary responsibility is taking care of yourself during this process. Detective, with respect, I'm not interested in limiting my responsibility to myself. Mark used my money, my reputation, and my business connections to facilitate his crimes. I have both the resources and the obligation to help repair the damage he's caused. What I didn't tell Rivera was that I'd spent the past week in Monterey doing more than just healing and transformation. I'd been building a comprehensive strategy for addressing the aftermath of Mark's crimes, one that would position me not as a passive victim seeking closure, but as an active force for justice and reform. After ending the call with Rivera, I contacted my attorney, Patricia Chen, my father's longtime friend, and one of Portland's most respected family law practitioners. We'd worked together to protect my assets during the investigation, but now I needed her expertise for something more complex. Patricia, I need to understand exactly what assets Mark has access to and how quickly we can freeze everything he's touched, I said when she answered her phone. I've been working on that since Detective Rivera first contacted us. The good news is that most of your personal assets are protected by the prenuptial agreement your father insisted on. Mark never had legal access to your trust fund or your ownership stake in the tech consulting firm. I felt a wave of gratitude toward my father's foresight. At the time, the prenup had seemed like an unnecessary complication, a suggestion born from his protective instincts rather than practical necessity. Now it was the foundation that would allow me to rebuild and help others do the same. What about the joint accounts? I asked. We've frozen everything pending the criminal investigation. The accounts Mark had been draining to fund his lifestyle, and criminal activities contained approximately $300,000 at the time of his arrest. We'll be able to recover most of that money, though some of it was spent on assets that may be difficult to liquidate. $300,000. The number was staggering and enraging in equal measure. That money represented years of contributions I'd made to what I thought was our shared future, systematically stolen to fund Mark's elaborate deceptions. But it also represented resources that could be redirected towards something meaningful. I want to establish a victim assistance fund, I told Patricia. Something that can provide immediate financial support to the women Mark defrauded and eventually expand to help victims of similar crimes. Patricia was quiet for a moment, and I could picture her taking notes on her legal pad, the same methodical approach she'd used when helping my father establish our business. That's ambitious, Rachel. Are you sure you're ready to take on that kind of responsibility while you're still processing your own trauma? The question was fair, but I'd been asking myself the same thing throughout my time in Monterey. The answer had become clearer with each passing day. I wasn't just processing trauma. I was transforming it into purpose. I'm not taking on this responsibility despite my trauma, I said. I'm taking it on because of what I've learned from it. Mark succeeded in deceiving me because I was isolated, trusting without verification, and financially dependent on joint accounts he could manipulate. The women he targeted after me fell victim to the same vulnerabilities. If I can address those systemic issues, I can prevent other women from experiencing what we've been through. My first meeting with Mark's other victims was scheduled for the following afternoon at a conference room in my father's office building. Rivera had connected me with Lisa from Seattle, the woman whose report had initially triggered the investigation, into Mark's activities. Through Lisa, We'd identified 4 other women across 3 states who'd been targeted by Mark's various schemes over the past 5 years. I arrived early to arrange the space, setting up comfortable seating and ensuring privacy for what I knew would be emotionally difficult conversations. My father had offered the use of his executive conference room, complete with catering and technical support for the women who would be joining by video conference. Lisa arrived first, a woman in her early 40s with short brown hair and intelligent eyes that reflected both pain and determination. She worked as a nurse practitioner in Seattle, financially independent and professionally successful, exactly the type of woman Mark preferred to target. "You must be Rachel," she said, extending her hand. "I want to thank you for organizing this." When Detective Rivera told me Mark was married, I felt sick thinking about what you must be going through. "What we're all going through," I corrected. "Mark's crimes affected all of us, and we're stronger when we face the consequences together." Over the next hour, 3 more women joined us in person, while 2 others connected via video conference from their respective cities. The group represented a cross-section of professional women: a real estate agent from Sacramento, a marketing executive from Phoenix, a veterinarian from Denver, and a restaurant owner from Boise. Each had been targeted by Mark using variations of the same basic strategy: elaborate lies about his business success, careful cultivation of emotional intimacy, and gradual requests for financial support disguised as temporary business needs. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. Mark had approached each woman through professional networking events or upscale social venues, presenting himself as a successful consultant or entrepreneur. He'd been patient, charming, and attentive, spending months building trust before introducing any financial element to the relationship. When he finally asked for money, it was always framed as a temporary business emergency or investment opportunity, with guaranteed returns. He showed me contracts, business documents, even fake bank statements proving his company's success, said Maria, the restaurant owner from Boise. Everything looked legitimate. I lent him $50,000 thinking I was helping someone I loved through a temporary cash flow problem. He had references, added Jennifer, the veterinarian from Denver. Phone numbers for supposed business partners who confirmed his stories. I didn't know until Detective Rivera contacted me that those references were probably accomplices or other victims who'd been manipulated into vouching for him. The sophistication of Mark's operation was staggering. This wasn't simple romance. Fraud. It was an elaborate criminal enterprise that had taken years to develop and required significant planning and coordination. Each woman had been carefully selected, thoroughly researched, and systematically exploited using techniques that suggested professional training in manipulation and fraud. As the women shared their experiences, I began to see patterns that went beyond individual victimization. Mark had exploited specific vulnerabilities that successful, independent women often possessed: the desire to be supportive partners, the tendency to trust professional credentials, and the inclination to maintain privacy about personal relationships. He'd weaponized virtues like loyalty, discretion, and generosity, turning them against the women who possessed them. "The worst part isn't the money," said Sarah, the marketing executive from Phoenix, who'd connected via video conference. "It's the way he made me doubt my own judgment. I pride myself on being smart, on being able to read people. The fact that I was so completely fooled makes me question everything about myself." Her words resonated with every woman in the room, myself included. Mark's crimes weren't just financial. They were psychological, designed to undermine his victims' confidence in their own perceptions and decision-making abilities. The damage extended far beyond the stolen money to include self-doubt, relationship anxiety, and professional insecurity that could last for years. "That's exactly why we're here," I said. Mark's strategy depended on isolating us, making each of us feel like we were the only ones who'd been fooled. But together, we can see that his success had nothing to do with our failures and everything to do with his expertise in deception. I outlined my proposal for the Victim Assistance Fund, explaining how recovered assets from Mark's crimes could be combined with additional resources to provide immediate financial support, professional counseling, and legal advocacy for current and future victims of similar crimes. This isn't just about getting our money back, I continued. It's about creating a support system that can help other women avoid what we've experienced and recover more quickly when they do become victims. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Each woman wanted to contribute to the fund, not just as beneficiaries, but as advocates. Lisa offered to develop educational materials based on her experience in healthcare communication. Maria volunteered to create support groups in smaller cities where resources were limited. Jennifer proposed working with professional organizations to educate women in business about the warning signs of sophisticated fraud. As the meeting concluded, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never experienced during my marriage. Mark had stolen years of my life and hundreds of thousands of dollars, but he'd also inadvertently connected me with remarkable women who shared my commitment to preventing others from enduring similar betrayals. The next morning brought another call from Detective Rivera, this time with news that would expand the scope of our mission significantly. Rachel, Mark's attorney has approached the district attorney about a plea deal. He's offering to provide information about other criminals operating similar schemes in exchange for reduced charges. What kind of information? Names, locations, methods of operation. According to Mark's attorney, there's an entire network of men running romance and investment fraud schemes, sharing victim lists and techniques. Mark claims he can help us identify and prosecute dozens of other criminals. The revelation was both encouraging and disturbing. Encouraging because it meant law enforcement could potentially prevent countless future crimes. Disturbing because it confirmed that Mark's operation was part of a larger criminal ecosystem that was systematically targeting women across the country. What does this mean for the victims? I asked. It means the scope of prosecution could be much larger than we initially anticipated. It also means that victim advocacy and support services are going to be more important than ever. There could be hundreds of victims once we start unraveling this network. Hundreds of victims. The number was overwhelming, but it also validated everything I'd been planning in Monterey. What had started as personal trauma and individual recovery was evolving into something much larger, a comprehensive response to an epidemic of crimes specifically targeting successful women. That afternoon, I met with Ashley Parker for the first time since Mark's arrest. She'd been staying with friends, avoiding the media attention that had surrounded the case, and processing her own role in Mark's downfall. We met at a quiet cafe away from downtown, where we could talk privately about the investigation and its aftermath. Ashley looked exhausted but determined, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her usual polished appearance replaced by understated clothing that suggested someone trying to avoid attention. The confident woman from the surveillance photos had been replaced by someone more cautious, more aware of the dangers that could hide behind charming facades. "How are you holding up?" I asked as we settled at a corner table. "Better than I expected," she said. "Wearing that wire, documenting his lies while pretending I still believed them, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But knowing that it helped stop him from hurting other women makes it worthwhile." Ashley's cooperation had been crucial to the prosecution's case. Her recorded conversations with Mark during their final trip together had captured him maintaining his elaborate lies, even when he believed he was completely safe from detection. The recordings would be key evidence in proving the intentional and systematic nature of his deceptions. "Detective Rivera told me about the plea deal Mark's proposing," I said. "How do you feel about the possibility of him receiving reduced charges in exchange for information about other criminals?" Ashley was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee while she considered the question. "Part of me wants him to face the maximum penalty for what he did to all of us. But if his information can help prevent other women from going through what we've experienced, then maybe reduced charges are worth it. Her perspective reflected the complexity of seeking justice in cases involving sophisticated financial crimes. Simple punishment, while satisfying, wouldn't address the systemic issues that allowed criminals like Mark to operate successfully for years. True justice required dismantling the networks and methods that enabled such crimes, even if that meant offering leniency to individual criminals willing to cooperate. I've been thinking about something else, Ashley continued. The marketing agency where I work specializes in digital communications and social media. I'd like to help develop an online platform where victims can connect with resources and support services. Something that could reach women in smaller communities who might not have access to traditional victim advocacy organizations. The proposal was brilliant and practical. Many of Mark's victims lived in cities where specialized support services were limited or non-existent. An online platform could provide immediate access to resources, connect victims with others who'd had similar experiences, and offer educational materials to help women recognize and avoid sophisticated fraud schemes. That would be incredible, I said. I've been working on establishing a victim assistance fund, and an online platform would be the perfect complement to direct financial support. We spent the next hour outlining how our respective initiatives could work together. Ashley's expertise in digital marketing could amplify the reach of the assistance fund, while the fund's resources could support the development and maintenance of the online platform. What had started as individual responses to personal trauma was becoming a coordinated effort to address systemic problems. As we prepared to leave the cafe, Ashley asked the question I'd been anticipating throughout our conversation. Have you thought about what you'll do when you face Mark in court, when you have to see him again and testify about what he did? I had thought about it extensively during my time in Monterey, working through the emotional complexity of confronting someone who'd shared my bed while systematically betraying me. The woman who'd discovered those hotel receipts would have been terrified of such a confrontation, worried about breaking down or saying something that could harm the prosecution's case. But the woman I'd become during my transformation was looking forward to it. I'm going to tell the truth, I said. All of it. About the money he stole, the lies he told, and the years of my life he wasted with his deceptions. But I'm also going to make sure everyone in that courtroom understands that his crimes didn't break me. They made me stronger, and they connected me with incredible women who are going to make sure other victims get the support and justice they deserve. Ashley smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since Mark's arrest. He has no idea what he's unleashed, does he? No, I said, thinking about the Victim Assistance Fund, the online platform, the network of women who'd committed to preventing others from experiencing similar betrayals. I don't think he does. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week, and I would finally come face to face with the man who'd stolen 8 years of my life while building a criminal empire funded by my trust and my money. But I was no longer the woman he'd married, and he was about to discover just how costly his underestimation of me would prove to be. The courthouse steps felt like a stage where the final act of an elaborate performance was about to unfold. I stood outside the Multnomah County Justice Center, wearing a navy blue suit that projected competence and authority, my hair styled in a way that commanded respect. The woman ascending those steps bore little resemblance to the naive wife who'd discovered hotel receipts in a jacket pocket months ago. Every detail of my appearance had been carefully chosen to send a message. I was no longer a victim to be pitied, but a force to be reckoned with. Media vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward an overcast Portland sky. Mark's case had attracted significant attention once the full scope of his criminal network became public knowledge. The story had everything reporters loved: a charismatic con man, wealthy victims, romantic deception, and a wife who'd transformed personal betrayal into a crusade for justice. I'd given several interviews in the weeks leading up to the trial, using each opportunity to highlight the systemic nature of crimes targeting successful women and to promote the resources we developed for victims. Ashley waited for me near the courthouse entrance, flanked by 3 of Mark's other victims who'd traveled to Portland to witness his sentencing. Maria from Boise stood with her shoulders squared, her restaurant owner's practicality evident in her no-nonsense demeanor. Jennifer from Denver looked nervous but determined, her veterinarian's compassion extending even to the difficult task of facing her betrayer in court. Lisa from Seattle projected the quiet strength of someone who'd already survived the worst and emerged stronger. "Ready for this?" Ashley asked as I joined their group. "More ready than I've ever been for anything in my life," I replied, and I meant it. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and the intensive work of building support systems for fraud victims. Mark had ultimately accepted a plea deal, providing information that led to the arrest of 11 other men operating similar schemes across the western United States. In exchange, his sentence had been reduced from a potential 40 years to 15 years in federal prison, with requirements for full restitution to his victims and permanent prohibition from various financial activities. The plea deal had been controversial among some victims who wanted maximum punishment, but I'd supported it because the information Mark provided had prevented countless future crimes. Through his cooperation, law enforcement had identified and dismantled a sophisticated network that had been operating for over a decade, stealing millions of dollars from hundreds of women. The prosecutions resulting from Mark's information were still ongoing, but the immediate impact had been significant. We entered the courthouse together, our footsteps echoing in the marble lobby. The victim assistance fund I'd established had grown beyond my initial expectations, now supporting not just Mark's direct victims, but women affected by the entire criminal network his information had exposed. We'd provided emergency financial assistance to 43 women, funded counseling services for dozens more, and created educational resources that had been downloaded over 10,000 times. Ashley's online platform had become a central hub for victims of romance and investment fraud, connecting women across the country with resources, support groups, and legal assistance. The platform's success had attracted attention from federal agencies, leading to partnerships that expanded our reach and effectiveness. What had started as personal healing had evolved into a national movement addressing epidemic levels of sophisticated fraud targeting women. The courtroom was packed with victims, their families, law enforcement officials, and members of the media. I took my seat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table, positioning myself where Mark would be forced to see me throughout the proceedings. I wanted him to observe what I'd become in his absence, to understand that his attempts to destroy me had instead catalyzed my transformation into someone far more powerful than the woman he'd married. When Mark entered the courtroom in his orange jumpsuit, flanked by his attorney and 2 bailiffs, I felt a strange detachment from the man I'd once loved. The confident charm that had defined him during our marriage was gone, replaced by the hollow demeanor of someone who'd lost everything through his own choices. He looked older, his dark hair showing gray at the temples, his previously athletic build softened by months of incarceration. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and I saw recognition followed immediately by something I'd never seen in Mark before: genuine fear. Not the calculated concern he'd displayed when playing the worried husband, but authentic terror at seeing what he'd awakened through his betrayals. I held his gaze steadily, allowing him to absorb the full impact of my transformation. "Achi." Catherine Morrison called the court to order, her authoritative presence commanding immediate silence. She'd presided over numerous high-profile cases during her career, but this sentencing had attracted unusual attention because of its implications for fraud prevention and victim advocacy. We're here today for the sentencing of Mark Robert Thompson, who has pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and racketeering in connection with a sophisticated criminal enterprise targeting women across multiple states. Judge Morrison began. "Before imposing sentence, I'll hear impact statements from victims who wish to address the court." I'd volunteered to speak first, setting the tone for what I hoped would be a powerful demonstration of survivors reclaiming their voices. I stood and approached the podium, feeling the weight of everyone's attention, but also the strength of the community we'd built together. Your Honor, my name is Rachel Thompson, and I was married to the defendant for 8 years. During that time, I believed I was supporting a husband building a legitimate business career. Instead, I was unknowingly funding a criminal enterprise that systematically targeted and exploited women across the country. I'd rehearsed these words carefully, but speaking them in Mark's presence carried an emotional weight I hadn't fully anticipated. This was the first time I'd addressed him directly since discovering his crimes, and the opportunity to confront him publicly felt both cathartic and empowering. Mark Thompson stole more than money from his victims, I continued. He stole our ability to trust, our confidence in our own judgment, and years of our lives that we'd invested in relationships we believed were genuine. But his crimes also revealed something he never expected: the incredible strength and resilience of the women he targeted. I turned slightly to make eye contact with Mark, ensuring he could see the transformation he'd catalyzed through his betrayals. The woman Mark married was trusting to the point of naivety, financially dependent on joint accounts he could manipulate, and isolated from the support systems that might have helped her recognize his deceptions. The woman standing before you today has used the painful education he provided to build resources that will protect other women from similar exploitation. I outlined the Victim Assistance Fund, the online platform, the educational initiatives, and the federal partnerships that had grown from our collective response to Mark's crimes. With each accomplishment I described, I watched his expression shift from fear to something approaching awe at the unintended consequences of his actions. Mark Thompson thought he was clever enough to maintain elaborate deceptions indefinitely, I said in conclusion. What he failed to understand is that successful women become successful by learning from their mistakes and adapting to new challenges. His crimes gave us an advanced education in recognizing and preventing sophisticated fraud. We've used that education to ensure that his victims will be the last women to suffer such extensive damage from such schemes. I returned to my seat amid respectful silence, feeling the profound satisfaction of having transformed personal pain into public purpose. Ashley followed me to the podium, then Maria, then Jennifer, then Lisa. Each woman delivered powerful testimony about the impact of Mark's crimes and the strength they'd discovered through recovery. But it was Ashley's statement that proved most devastating to Mark's remaining composure. I want to address something specific about the defendant's methods, Ashley said, her voice clear and confident. Mark Thompson didn't just lie about his marital status or his business activities. He created completely fabricated personas designed to exploit specific vulnerabilities in successful women. He studied us, researched our backgrounds, and crafted elaborate performances tailored to our individual psychology. She pulled out her phone and played a brief audio recording from their final trip together, capturing Mark's voice as he maintained his lies even while being secretly recorded. This recording demonstrates the calculated nature of his deceptions. Even when he believed he was completely safe from detection, he continued weaving elaborate fictions about his identity and circumstances. This wasn't a man who made poor choices in the heat of the moment. This was a professional criminal who viewed deception as his career. Ashley's technological expertise had proven invaluable throughout the investigation and prosecution. Her recordings had provided prosecutors with evidence of Mark's mindset and methods that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional investigation. The audio clips she'd captured revealed a man who took pride in his ability to manipulate women, discussing his techniques with the casual confidence of someone who viewed fraud as an art form. When the victim impact statements concluded, Mark's attorney requested permission for the defendant to address the court before sentencing. Judge Morrison granted the request, though she cautioned that any statement would not affect the agreed-upon sentence from the plea deal. Mark approached the podium with none of the confidence he displayed during our marriage. His movements were hesitant, his posture reflecting the weight of having his carefully constructed world completely demolished. When he began speaking, his voice was barely audible, forcing Judge Morrison to instruct him to speak louder. "I want to apologize to everyone I've hurt through my actions," he began, reading from prepared notes. "I know that words can't undo the damage I've caused or restore the trust I've broken. I take full responsibility for my crimes and for the pain I've inflicted on innocent people who deserved better than the deception I gave them." The apology felt rehearsed and hollow, carefully crafted by his attorney to express remorse without admitting to the psychological manipulation that had been central to his methods. He continued reading for several minutes, acknowledging the financial harm he'd caused while avoiding any reference to the emotional devastation or the systematic nature of his targeting. "What struck me most about Mark's statement wasn't what he said, but what he didn't say. There was no acknowledgement of the years he'd spent studying and exploiting women's vulnerabilities. No recognition of the sophisticated planning required to maintain multiple relationships simultaneously. No admission that his crimes represented a deliberate choice to build wealth and status through the systematic destruction of other people's lives." When Mark finished reading and returned to his seat, Judge Morrison began her remarks before imposing sentence. "This case represents more than individual crimes against specific victims," she said. "It highlights a troubling trend of sophisticated fraud schemes specifically designed to exploit successful women. The defendant's actions demonstrate a level of premeditation and psychological manipulation that extends far beyond ordinary financial crimes." Judge Morrison reviewed the details of Mark's plea agreement, emphasizing the cooperation that had led to additional prosecutions and the prevention of future crimes. She acknowledged the controversy surrounding the reduced sentence, but explained her reasoning for accepting the plea deal. "While some may argue that 15 years is insufficient punishment for the defendant's crimes, the information he provided has prevented exponentially more harm than any individual sentence could address. The dismantling of the criminal network he helped expose represents justice on a scale that transcends personal vengeance." She then imposed the agreed-upon sentence: 15 years in federal prison, full restitution to all identified victims, and lifetime prohibition from various financial activities. Mark would be eligible for parole after serving 12 years, assuming good behavior and continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. As the bailiffs led Mark away, he turned to look at me one final time. In that moment, I saw complete understanding of what he'd lost through his choices, not just his freedom or his financial security, but any possibility of returning to the life of deception he'd built. The criminal network that had supported his activities was destroyed. The methods he'd perfected were now widely known and actively countered by law enforcement. The women he'd targeted had become advocates who would recognize and expose similar schemes in the future. Mark Thompson had eliminated his own criminal profession through the very crimes that had once made him successful. Outside the courthouse, media representatives requested interviews with the victims who'd participated in the sentencing. I'd agreed to speak with several reporters, using each opportunity to highlight the resources we'd developed and the ongoing need for fraud prevention education. "Mrs. Thompson, how does it feel to see your husband sentenced for crimes that directly affected you?" asked a reporter from Portland's largest television station. "Today's sentencing provides closure for the legal aspects of this case," I replied. "But the real victory is what his victims have accomplished together. We've built support systems that will help other women avoid similar exploitation, and we've demonstrated that sophisticated fraud schemes can be defeated by informed and connected victims working together." The reporter followed up with questions about my future plans and whether I intended to continue victim advocacy work beyond this case. "The Victim Assistance Fund and online platform we've established will continue operating indefinitely," I said. "Fraud targeting successful women is an ongoing problem that requires ongoing solutions. What started as personal healing has become a professional mission." That evening, Ashley and I hosted a gathering for the victims who'd traveled to Portland for the sentencing. We met at my father's office building, using the same conference room where we'd first assembled months earlier as strangers connected only by shared betrayal. Now we were partners in an enterprise that had grown far beyond our initial expectations. Maria from Boise had taken a leadership role in establishing support groups in smaller cities, using her business experience to create sustainable organizations that could operate independently. Jennifer from Denver had partnered with professional veterinary associations to educate women in male-dominated fields about the specific targeting they often faced. Lisa from Seattle had developed training materials now used by law enforcement agencies across the Pacific Northwest. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Lisa said, as we celebrated the conclusion of Mark's prosecution. "The network we've built around this case has proven incredibly effective. What if we expanded it to address other types of sophisticated fraud targeting women?" The suggestion resonated with everyone present. Our experience with Mark's case had taught us that the vulnerabilities he'd exploited weren't unique to romance fraud. Successful women faced similar targeting in various contexts: business partnerships, investment opportunities, real estate transactions, and professional relationships. The same principles we'd developed for recognizing and preventing romance fraud could be adapted to address these broader threats. Ashley had already begun developing educational content about investment fraud, using her marketing expertise to create materials that could reach women in various professional fields. The online platform had attracted attention from women who'd experienced different types of sophisticated deception, creating opportunities to expand our mission beyond the specific crimes Mark had committed. "I think we've accidentally created something bigger than a victim support organization," I said, looking around the room at women who'd transformed personal trauma into professional expertise. "We've created a community of informed advocates who can recognize and counter sophisticated manipulation in any context." The observation felt like a revelation. What had started as individual responses to specific crimes had evolved into a comprehensive understanding of how predators identified and exploited successful women. The knowledge we'd gained through painful experience had value far beyond our personal healing. 6 months later, I stood in a different kind of courthouse, this time in San Francisco Federal Court, watching the sentencing of another man whose criminal network Mark's cooperation had helped expose. The Victim Assistance Fund had supported women affected by this case as well, and several had traveled to witness justice being served. The work had become my full-time focus, requiring me to step back from day-to-day operations of the tech consulting firm my father and I had built. But the transition felt natural, even inevitable. The skills that had made me successful in business translated perfectly to victim advocacy, strategic thinking, financial management, relationship building, and the ability to see patterns others missed. My marriage to Mark was officially dissolved. The divorce proceedings completed with minimal drama thanks to the prenuptial agreement and the overwhelming evidence of his crimes. I'd reclaimed my maiden name, Rachel Chen, symbolically returning to the identity I'd held before allowing someone else's deceptions to define my life. The house Mark and I had shared was sold, with proceeds contributing to the Victim Assistance Fund after my personal losses were recovered. I'd purchased a smaller place in Portland's Pearl District, chosen for its proximity to the advocacy organization's offices and its representation of a fresh start built entirely on my own terms. Ashley had moved to Portland to work full-time on expanding the online platform, her expertise in digital marketing proving invaluable as we reached women across the country and eventually internationally. The platform had attracted partnerships with law enforcement agencies, academic researchers, and other victim advocacy organizations, creating a comprehensive resource that addressed multiple types of sophisticated fraud. Standing outside the San Francisco courthouse after another successful prosecution, I reflected on the unexpected path my life had taken. Mark's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed strengths I'd never known I possessed and connected me with remarkable women who shared my commitment to protecting others from similar exploitation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Rivera, now a close collaborator in our fraud prevention efforts. Rachel, just got word that the task force wants to expand the program nationally. They're requesting a formal presentation on your model for victim support and prevention education. Congratulations on changing the entire approach to these crimes. The recognition felt gratifying, but what mattered more was the knowledge that our work was preventing other women from experiencing the betrayal and financial loss that had originally brought us together. Each woman who recognized warning signs because of our educational materials, each victim who found support through our platform, each criminal prosecution enabled by our advocacy represented a victory that transcended personal revenge. As I drove back to Portland along the coastal highway where I'd first begun my transformation, I thought about the question Amanda had asked me during those crucial days in Monterey. Who was I when I wasn't trying to be the perfect wife to a sociopath? The answer had taken months to emerge, but it was clear now. I was someone who transformed pain into purpose, someone who used hard-earned wisdom to protect others, someone who built communities of strength from individual experiences of vulnerability. Mark had tried to reduce me to a source of funding for his criminal activities, but instead he'd catalyzed my evolution into someone far more powerful than the woman he'd married. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly to my left as I drove north toward home, toward the life I'd built entirely on my own terms, toward the work that had grown from betrayal into a mission that would continue long after Mark Thompson finished serving his sentence. He'd stolen 8 years of my life, but he'd also inadvertently given me a purpose that was more meaningful than any marriage built on deception could ever have been. In trying to destroy me, Mark had created the very force that would ensure his methods could never again be used so successfully against other women. That irony felt like the most satisfying revenge of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.